In July of 2023, the Mega Millions jackpot prize reached $910 million, the eighth largest prize in history. The odds of winning were astronomically low, 1 in 302.6 million. Despite this fact, millions of Americans rushed to buy tickets. News stories emerged with a well-known insight that 63.9% of Black Americans play the lottery in comparison to 43.8% of Hispanics and 41.2% of whites. Despite lower rates of wealth and income, Black Americans have always participated in daily gambling at a high rate. To understand why, we have to revisit the economic realities of Black America in the late 19th and early 20th century. There's no better place to do so than in Harlem, New York. You are watching Black Belief. Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you never miss a new video. One of the earliest lotteries was held in 1720. Its prize was a new house in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Colonial cities like Philadelphia and Boston funded their growth through lotteries to avoid direct taxation. This tactic was borrowed from their colonial powers in Europe, who had used lotteries since at least the 16th century to raise revenue. The earliest colleges in the United States, like the College of New Jersey, which would later become Princeton University, Harvard College, and Yale University, were also built using lottery revenue. The early lotteries were called policy, a name which may have derived from the Italian word polizza, which means receipt or ticket. In a policy lottery, pellets with numbers from 1 to 78 were placed in a policy wheel. Participants placed bets on which numbers would appear when 12 pellets were drawn. In the post-Civil War period, millions of dollars were made by entrepreneurs who established private lotteries. People could participate in policy games for as little as a penny, and the lottery owners walked away with large profits that were free from federal taxation. In 1869, Charles Turner Howard founded the Louisiana Lottery Company. Soon he was raking in $30 million a year. The Southern elite resented Howard's newfound wealth, but he made sure to donate to several local charities and to pay off important officials. These donations were also meant to hide the dirty secrets of his company's operations. The company would sell tickets, and all ticket numbers would be placed in a holder for the drawing. The company employed 2 old Confederate generals for $10,000 a year to witness these drawings and create a veneer of trustworthiness. Behind the scenes, however, the company assigned unsold ticket numbers to itself and frequently selected those numbers as the lottery winner. This meant that they were able to keep all the revenue raised without paying out a prize to the winner. Tricks and scams like these ran rampant as bettors and owners tried to outsmart each other. Participation in lotteries could be promoted across states via the mail, and many realized they could gain a competitive advantage if they could find out the winning number before everyone else. One organization stationed people atop tall structures from Wilmington, Delaware to New York City for the Delaware Lottery. When the number was announced in Wilmington, a complex code of red and white lights were used to transmit the number from structure to structure. This system could transmit the winning number to New York in 20 minutes, an amazing feat for the pre-internet world. Another method involved using carrier pigeons to deliver the numbers into the city. The ability to access the winning number earlier simply caused more problems. A parallel economy emerged where people sold what they claimed were winning numbers. Bettors would have to quickly buy the alleged early number and hurry to place a bet before the lottery deadline without giving away that they were trying to cheat the system. This process was called pigeoning. Owners, meanwhile, would use early knowledge of the winning number in order to sell additional lottery tickets in the last moments of the contest by enticing bettors with numbers that they knew would lose. Some shops simply tampered with their clocks in order to trick people into placing bets after the winning number had already been announced. If all else failed, owners would just accuse a winner of pigeoning them, even when the bettor had chosen the winning number honestly. The public grew increasingly aware of these dishonest practices, and a national morality movement crusade ensued, which scrutinized lotteries as a vice meant to prey on the poor. New York banned the lottery in 1833. Other states followed suit. By 1878, the Louisiana Lottery Company was the only legal lottery company in the country. The last straw came in 1879, when Louisiana adopted a new constitution. To the shock of voters, the Louisiana Lottery Company's monopoly was unceremoniously extended to 1895. The public suspected that elected officials had been bribed. The state treasurer who was implicated in the scandal fled to Honduras with $1 million of state funds. In the 1888 election, a Democrat governor was elected on an anti-lottery platform. In 1890, the federal government banned the sale of lottery tickets via the mail and prevented lotteries from advertising in the newspaper. In 1893, Louisiana banned the lottery completely. The Louisiana Lottery Company moved its operations to Honduras. Charles Turner Howard died years earlier in a carriage accident in 1885. The lottery bans created fertile ground for black market networks to move in. In Harlem, New York, and other cities, the policy game was replaced by the numbers game. The numbers game involved betting on a series of 3 numbers from 0 to 999. Bettors could wager on any combination of 3 numbers or on 1 digit. Bets could be made throughout most businesses like beauty parlors, bars, drugstores, restaurants, and pool halls. People called numbers runners collected money in bets and provided a receipt from a policy book to the bettor. The numbers runner would return the cash collected in the policy book to the clearinghouse, which was also called the policy bank. One of the challenges for those who operated numbers games was that of choosing a sufficiently random number. Many still suspected the games were fixed due to the reputation of the older policy games. An immigrant from the U.S. Virgin Islands named Casper Holstein had a brilliant idea. To provide confidence amongst players, he thought policy bankers should use third-party institutions to provide the daily winning number. Trusted financial institutions like the Federal Reserve Bank, New York Stock Exchange, or the U.S. Treasury published their financial balances in the newspaper. In Holstein's numbers game, he used a combination of the digits from these values as the daily winning number. For example, one formula took the second and third digits of the Federal Reserve's total bank clearances and the third digit in the institution's credit balance. So if the day's total bank clearances were $589 million and the credit balance was $116 million, the winning number for that day would be 896. While the odds of winning were 1,000 to 1, prizes were paid out at a rate of 600 to 1, resulting in huge profits for policy bankers. Bets could be placed for as little as a cent, nickel, or a dime. So a bet costing a dime could garner winnings of $60, which was a substantial amount of money at the time. Policy bank operators received 20% of the day's total receipts, and numbers runners typically received a 10% tip of a player's winnings. This strategy for picking a daily number caused the numbers game industry to skyrocket. Once again, entrepreneurial thinkers understood the importance of discovering the number early. A person called a tipster used connections made on Wall Street to get the winning number before it was announced. Sometimes this strategy failed since the final totals were adjusted in the last moments before they were published in the newspaper. However, the number of successes was enough to form a parallel economy. Tipsters would profit from both sides by selling inside information to bettors and policy bankers. Casper Holstein became one of the first Black policy kings. At his peak, he brought in $12,000 a day, and by 1930, it's estimated that he had a net worth of $2 million. Another infamous policy king was actually a policy queen named Stephanie St. Clair. Her early life is still a mystery, but many historians believe St. Clair was born in the Caribbean. In the mid-1920s, she started a numbers racket, possibly from her winnings gained from playing the numbers herself. By 1930, newspapers estimated her net worth was around $500,000. She lived at 409 Edgecombe Avenue, or the 409, an apartment building rented by the Black Harlem elite. Some of the 409's residents at various times included W.E.B. Du Bois, a young lawyer named Thurgood Marshall, and famous painter Aaron Douglas. People from all walks of life played the numbers game: the working class, the middle class, and the upper class. People dreamed of winning and using their prize to send their child to school, move to a better area, or go on a trip. As a boy, Future Secretary of State Colin Powell's father bought a home with proceeds he won from hitting the number. The numbers game was the second largest employer in Harlem behind the government. Harry Belafonte's uncle, Lena Horne's father, and even Ella Fitzgerald worked in the numbers game. By 1925, there were 30 policy banks in Harlem, and number bosses were making millions of dollars. Policy bankers were careful to invest a portion of their profits into community projects and scholarships. Casper Holstein financed dormitories at historically black colleges, established a Baptist school in Liberia, created a museum in New York, and provided hurricane relief for his native U.S. Virgin Islands. He also invested his profits in legal businesses like nightclubs. Policy banks acted as irregular banking institutions within the black community. They extended credit to frequent customers and provided loans, albeit at high interest rates, to individuals and businesses. Because most black people did not have equal access to mainstream banks, the numbers game became a way of funding improvements within the community. Critics of the numbers game felt that it took advantage of the poor by encouraging them to gamble their wages as opposed to saving them. Some people would pawn their belongings in order to get money to place bets. Some black reformers believed that racial uplift could only come through hard work, thrift, and prudence. Vices like gambling and drinking, in their view, demoralized the community. The Roaring '20s was a period of wild parties and large fortunes, but a shift was coming. In 1928, Casper Holstein was beaten and kidnapped by 5 white men who demanded tens of thousands of dollars in ransom. Suddenly, days later, Holstein was released. When asked to identify his attackers, he refused to do so, citing business reasons. Even without his help, police were able to find his kidnappers. The incident was also published in the New York Times. The publicity around the kidnapping caught the attention of mobsters, corrupt officials, and law enforcement around the city. Previously, the mob declined to get involved in the numbers game and preferred bootlegging instead. But now they were suddenly interested in so-called nigger pennies after reading about the wealth that Casper Holstein and other policy kings had amassed. Holstein seemed to have understood the impact of too much attention. Before his kidnapping, he kept a low profile and always gave his donations anonymously. New York City was now aware of the millions of untaxed income being generated in Harlem and decided to take action. On December 30th, 1929, Stephanie St. Clair was arrested and charged with possessing betting slips. During her trial, she testified for 3 hours and admitted to being a policy queen. She alleged that her arrest was a result of jealousy from certain corrupt police officers who targeted her after they were unable to get on her payroll. She was convicted and sentenced to 8 months and 20 days in the workhouse. The Samuel C. Bury Commission was convened in December of 1930 at the behest of New York Governor Franklin Delano Roosevelt to investigate corruption in New York courts and the NYPD. Stephanie St. Clair, who was by then released from prison, testified in front of the commission that she had paid a total of $6,000 to police officers to avoid arrest. In response, 13 police officers were suspended. Stephanie St. Clair seemed unfazed about the risk of highlighting police corruption. She would go toe-to-toe with anyone who sought to take control of her business. Other threats would soon put her courage to the test. The instability of the economy seen in the stock market crash of 1929 was also present in the numbers game. Every year around Thanksgiving, November 25th, players often bet on some combination of the numbers 2, 5, and 7. The number 25 represented Thanksgiving Day, and the number 7 was the sum of the numbers 2 and 5. In 1931, on Wednesday, November 24th, the winning number was 527. So many players had bet on this number that many black policy bankers were wiped out. The day became known as Black Wednesday. Waiting in the wings was a mobster named Arthur Simon Flegenheimer, also known as Dutch Schultz. There were rumblings that prohibition, the criminalization of selling alcohol, was about to come to an end. Bootleggers like Schultz were on the prowl for their next black market business venture. He decided to move in on the black numbers game. He gave black policy bankers 2 choices: turn over their businesses and work for him, or pay him a portion of their earnings in exchange for protection. Refusal to cooperate would lead to assault or murder. Schultz had no intention of providing philanthropy to the Black community and engineered ways to gain even higher profits. The revelations from the Seabury Commission alerted New York institutions that their financial disclosures were associated with gambling, and they stopped publishing values in the newspaper. Therefore, policy bankers had to find another way to generate the winning number while maintaining the perception of fairness. Some began using a number called the handle, which represented the total amount of money that was bet at Belmont Park in New York each day. Schultz employed an accountant and mathematical genius named Otto Abadaba Bergman, who was able to calculate the minimum amount Schultz needed to bet at the racetrack to alter the handle at the last minute. This scheme ensured Schultz was always in control of the winning number and could maximize losses in Harlem, where the majority of bettors were located. For his services, Bergman was paid $10,000 a week. Other bankers used numbers from out of state, like those from the Cincinnati Clearinghouse. Stephanie St. Clair refused to be intimidated. She and other Black policy bankers banded together to fight back. She led groups into white-owned establishments that were working with white policy banks, smashed up their property, and took their policy books. She warned them to get out of the business and stay out. She organized a Buy Black campaign, which encouraged players to only place bets with Black policy banks. She connected the white infiltration of the numbers game with Jim Crow segregation. Dutch Schultz responded in kind by placing a contract on Stephanie St. Clair's life. But in the end, he would be the one on the wrong end of a gun. U.S. Attorney Thomas Dewey decided to prosecute Schultz for tax evasion. Using a variety of tactics, Schultz was able to secure a hung jury in 1934, and a new trial was scheduled for 1935. The expense of his defense was substantial. He was drawing away more and more profits from his numbers game business for his personal legal battles, leading to dissatisfaction amongst his workforce. Bo Weinberg, Schultz's chief lieutenant, reached out to Charlie Lucky Luciano, a man who is considered the father of organized crime. Luciano established the Commission, a governing board composed of the heads of mafia families throughout the country, which oversaw all of their operations. Weinberg was hoping to make a deal that would eliminate Dutch Schultz and allow him to take over the numbers game business while paying a portion of profits to Luciano. Secretly, however, Luciano already had plans to take over Schultz's business himself and divide it amongst his associates once Schultz was convicted of tax evasion. Prosecutor Dewey and New York Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia were enraged when in 1935, in a new trial in Malone, New York, Dutch Schultz was acquitted. Schultz had moved to Malone before the trial started and ingratiated himself with the residents by presenting a clean-cut image and donating to local charities. Shortly after his acquittal, Bo Weinberg disappeared and was never seen or heard from again. Thomas Dewey wasn't just going after Schultz, he was investigating mob activities throughout the entire city. Schultz approached the commission, asked for permission to assassinate Dewey, but they refused because such an action would elicit the attention of federal law enforcement agencies. Later, Albert Anastasia, the leader of Murder Incorporated, the enforcement arm for the National Crime Syndicate, told Luciano that Schultz had asked him to stake out Thomas Dewey's residence and was planning to go through with the assassination on his own. The commission met and decided to kill Dutch Schultz instead. Dutch Schultz was shot on October 23, 1935, at the Palace Chop House restaurant at 12 East Park Street in Newark, New Jersey. As he lay in the hospital fighting for his life, Stephanie St. Clair sent him a telegram reading, "As ye sow, so shall you reap." Schultz died on October 26. Stephanie St. Clair's undoing wouldn't come from a business rival, but from love. In 1936, she entered a non-legal contract union with a man named Sufi Abdul Hamid. Sufi Hamid was born Eugene Brown in 1903 in Lowell, Massachusetts. Like many other African Americans, he experimented with different religious philosophies. At one point, he was living in Chicago, promoting his own version of Buddhism and calling himself Bishop Conshakin. By 1932, he had moved to New York, converted to Islam, and changed his name to His Holiness Bishop Emuru al-Mu'minin Sufi A. Hamid. There's no evidence that he was involved with the Nation of Islam, which had been founded in Detroit, Michigan in 1930. With the onset of the Great Depression, unemployment in Harlem hit 50%. Hamid decided to protest white businesses in order to encourage them to hire black workers. He also targeted Jewish store owners, claiming he was the only one fit to carry on the war against the Jews. These and other anti-Semitic statements earned him the nickname Black Hitler. Hamid's strategy involved collecting $1 from each unemployed worker who wanted a job. After collecting his dues, he would subsequently begin his protest action against a particular business and force them to hire the workers who had paid him. This process made Hamid very wealthy. Store owners attempted to have him arrested, but he was never convicted of any crime. His contract with St. Clair specified a 1-year relationship trial period, at which time they could decide to part ways or proceed with the legal ceremony. On January 19, 1938, St. Clair fired 3 shots at Hamid after learning of an affair with a woman named Dorothy Fufu Fatam Matthews. St. Clair claimed that the gun accidentally went off during a struggle. Hamid claimed that St. Clair had threatened him weeks before the shooting when he told her he no longer wanted to continue their relationship. Stephanie St. Clair was arrested and sentenced to a minimum of 2 years and a maximum of 10 years at the New York State Prison for Women at Bedford. Sufi Abdul Hamid went on to marry Dorothy Matthews in April of 1938. Casper Holstein retired from the numbers game after serving a year in jail for illegal gambling. He died in Harlem on April 5, 1944. Upon St. Clair's release, she slipped into anonymity, never again getting into the numbers game and passing away at an undisclosed location sometime around 1969. When St. Clair went to prison, her lieutenant, Ellsworth Raymond Bumpy Johnson, took her place. With other organized crime syndicates trying to move in and heighten law enforcement scrutiny, community leaders like Representative Adam Clayton Powell and James R. Lawson, president of the Harlem Council for Economic Development, lobbied to legalize the industry and arranged for black policy banks to get licenses. They hoped to regain control of the industry and direct profits back into the neighborhood. Black policy bankers were losing out as the fees for police protection increased and some officers intentionally favored non-black operators. In 1952, Bumpy Johnson was arrested for conspiracy to distribute heroin and sentenced to 15 years. His incarceration was the final sign that the golden age of black policy kings was over. In 1966, New York legalized the lottery. At first, these legal lottery games didn't affect the illegal numbers game, as the legal games were more like sweepstakes, where results were announced every couple of weeks. Finally, in 1975, New York introduced Pick 3, a legal form of the numbers game, which had dominated Harlem for decades. Why do black people buy lottery tickets despite the low odds of winning? In a Washington Post article about the history of gambling in black communities, one Harlem bettor is quoted as saying, "The big difference between lotto and life is that in this game, everybody has the same chance." Many black bettors view their daily numbers play as an investment comparable to the type of wagers people make in the stock market. In the 1920s, this comparison was not entirely unreasonable, given the booms and busts which simultaneously made people very rich and wiped out the fortunes of others. Some could argue that the same situation exists with so-called legitimate investments today. Given that the small amounts used to purchase tickets would take so long to save into a substantial sum, and the likelihood of improving their situations through education or work training are limited, black bettors feel their best chances of life-changing income is in the numbers game. At the same time, these perceptions amongst black communities have been stoked further by lottery advertising. Critics have highlighted the conflict of interest when governments who are ostensibly tasked with reducing addiction and predatory practices are nevertheless incentivized to promote gambling in order to bring in more revenue. Advertising often leads people to believe that they can improve their odds of winning based on the numbers they choose, and that the chances of winning are greater than they actually are. State lotteries are exempt from the Federal Trade Commission's Truth in Advertising standards, since they are state entities. The legalization of the lottery is promoted amongst the voting public by promising that the revenue will be used for public goods, especially education. The public is told that lottery revenues will be earmarked for education, but fail to mention that earmarking is not a legally binding classification. In many states, the lottery revenues go to the general fund, where legislatures can use the money as they see fit. Studies conducted on lotteries have found that states have often decreased education funding after the legalization of the lottery. Lottery revenue simply replaced the money previously allocated for education in the state's budget, and the excess revenue was used for other purposes. Lotteries bring in about $82 billion per year, meaning they generate more money than corporate income taxes. After prizes and the operating costs are paid, about $21 billion is left for use towards government programs. Some states like Georgia passed laws that made it illegal to use lottery funds for purposes other than scholarships, pre-kindergarten, and classroom technology. But even with these restrictions, the formula used for funding education does not ensure that funds are given to poor neighborhoods where the majority of betting takes place. The college scholarships funded by lotteries go to the children of middle-class citizens. States have responded to this phenomenon by trying to devise progressive allocation formulas. Still, at least 15 state lotteries are seen as a regressive tax, where the state allocates less per pupil funds to high poverty districts than they allocate to low poverty districts. Even if all the criticisms are addressed, critics still ask, is it worth it? Is gambling the best way to raise funds for the public good? At this point, many states don't care. They have become reliant on the large revenues and ignored the pitfalls. Meanwhile, bettors continue to play with the same hopes of the millions who played before them. Most of them will never win, and certainly not a prize big enough that will pay back their losses. David Just, a professor in the Department of Economics at Cornell University, observed, "It may not be a good investment, but to people with limited resources, this may be the only way they have to sort of dream big and think that something great is going to happen that's just going to change everything." The players may have changed, but the numbers game remains the same.